Hello, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to episode 470 of Tranquility du Jour, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Tranquility du Jour is a series of nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. Join my love notes to get exclusive content, updates, and giveaways not shared elsewhere, and access Tranquil Treasures, an array of audio, video, and PDFs. You'll find a link to this in the show notes, kimberlywilson.com/470. You can also subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcast or Overcast. Also visit kimberlywilson.com/podcast for more episodes and the Tranquility du Jour podcast app. If you have a moment to share a review of this podcast over on iTunes, would be so grateful. It helps other people find the show, or even a review of any of my books over on Amazon. So Austin April wrote, "This is my favorite podcast. Kimberly gives practical advice on how to live a more fulfilling lifestyle. She's incredibly inspiring. Her topics are timely and fresh and include fashion advice, health, beauty, gift-giving, party throwing, travel, anything and everything a hip tranquil chick, or at least an aspiring hip tranquil chick would want to know." And then she added, "I've been listening for 10 years and watching, listening, witnessing Kimberly's evolution as a person and her offerings from Tranquil Space, the yoga studio, to the clothing line, books, CDs, e-classes has been incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much, April, for following along for so long and for being part of this journey. Share any takeaways using hashtag TDJ Podcast. I love knowing what resonates with you from each of these episodes." Now, in this week's edition of Tranquility du Jour, I chat with Lama Palden Drolma about her new book, Love on Every Breath. Learn the 8-step extraordinary Tonglen meditation for transforming pain into joy. So my last two events of the year, actually circling right into 2020, is the mini retreat, New Year's Eve mini retreat happening at YogaWorks Dupont on New Year's Eve. This is something I've been doing for about a decade now. And this is formerly Tranquil Space. And then also New Year's Salon happening in my office on January 1st, 2020. Featured guest, Lama Palden Drolma is the author of Love on Every Breath. A licensed psychotherapist, spiritual teacher, and coach, she studied Buddhism in the Himalayas with some of the most preeminent Tibetan masters of the 20th century. Learn more about her at lamapalden.org. Welcome, Lama Palden.
Thank you. A pleasure to be speaking with you today.
It's great to have you on the show, chatting about something that I really, really like, having been exposed to the practice of Tonglen. And your new book, Love on Every Breath, Tonglen Meditation for Transforming Pain into Joy. Now, before we dive into the book, can you tell us a little bit about your personal story and how you came to be a Lama?
Oh, yeah, sure. I've always been really interested in the spiritual. The first memory I have of that was around 3 years old. And I was a very devout child, actually, in the Episcopal Church and connected with Jesus, through being in the church and stuff. And I think this is because I always felt, even as a small child, that there was something more real going on, and I wanted to connect with it, more real than what I saw in the everyday interactions and life that I was in. And I have found that to be true, actually, in connecting with the spiritual. It's obviously another layer that I don't know if we need to say more real, but is definitely very sustaining, nourishing, and enlivening for us. So I studied comparative religion, getting into my teens and 20s, and studied and practiced in various religious spiritual traditions, and then met a great Tibetan master and realized that he was my main teacher, and went to the Himalayas to study with him and met other great masters, and then eventually went into a 3-year retreat when I was 30 It's a traditional Tibetan meditation training, about 3 years, 4 months or so, where you're in intensive cloistered meditation retreat. And I was in Salt Spring in British Columbia on top of a mountain. And so doing retreat there. And then after I came out, about a year later, my teacher authorized me as a Lama. And it turns out that the 3-year retreat often, not always, but often is a training ground for Lamas. And I never actually had an idea that I would ever teach. I never wanted to, but it just sort of happened to me. And so, he authorized me as a Lama. And then, after I taught occasionally and was there for people. And then about 10 years after that, in the mid-90s or late 90s, I started a Tibetan Buddhist center in Marin County, California.
Oh, great. And what's it called?
It's a Sanskrit name, Sukha Siddhi, which means accomplishment of great bliss. And it's the name of an enlightened woman from the 11th century who is in our lineage, one of the lineages I received and that I teach.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you. So any Bay Area people, be sure to check that out. That's wonderful. Now, tell us about Tonglen. Okay, so we've brought it up, of course, with the title of your book. And how is Tonglen meditation different than, say, your basic seated meditation focusing on breath?
Well, it's, within meditation in general, from all different religions, spiritual, whatever, there's, thousands of ways to meditate. And the Tibetans have a very highly developed systems of meditation to purify, transform, and completely liberate us. And there's a whole kind of set of meditations in Tibetan Buddhism called creative practice or creative meditation. And so Tonglen falls in this category because it's creative in the sense that you're imagining certain things, visualizing certain things. You're working with the breath, you're working with love, compassion, with wisdom, and so you're bringing a lot of factors together. You can even work with mantra in the heart of the Tonglen practice. So Tonglen is essentially a meditation that opens our heart, opens us to our innate awakened love and compassion that's in the heart essence of each of us. So it opens us to that which is already in us and then helps us to really much more fully embody that and learn to really love and have compassion for ourselves and then for all others as well.
And then how does love on every breath kind of tie into all of this?
Well, in the Tonglen practice, one contemplates whoever you're imagining in front of you, whoever you're doing it for in that moment, whether oneself or a group of people or a friend or whoever. And you contemplate the challenges they've had, traumas they may have had, various things that they're dealing with or have dealt with, and develop compassion for the person or people. And then you already having in this particular form of Tonglen, the love on every breath form, which, by the way, comes from another awakened woman of 11th century who was also in the lineage I received, and her name was Naguma. So there were two enlightened women from Kashmir in the 11th century that were very important in the lineage I received from Kala Rinpoche. And so in this, then contemplating the person suffering and having already established oneself in a place of inseparability with the bodhisattva of compassion, with really what we would call awakened or wisdom love. And this can be done. I explain in the book how you can use other forms. You don't have to use a Buddhist form. You could use Jesus or, another spiritual being for this, or the Great Spirit or God. But you go through a series of steps, and then the step where you allow this awake divine presence to become one with oneself and establishing the light of that in the heart. And then when we breathe in the person's suffering that we're meditating on, it's not only our human self or our ego that feels like it's breathing in the suffering, but it's awakened presence, divine presence, inseparable with us, with who we truly are. So we breathe in their suffering, and it's instantly transformed in our heart chakra through the light and transformed into healing energy, into awakened love, and you breathe out that love into the other person or people. So it's done on the breath, breathing in, the transformation happens, breathing out, the love and healing energy is sent out to the person you're meditating on. So that's a long explanation for something that we can do in, one breath cycle.
Well, you know what I love about this too, whenever I initially learned this, the teacher said, even if you see a child, on the bus crying, right, you can practice Tonglen for this person. So, sometimes it's strangers, right? And it can be done in the moment, which there's something very beautiful about that.
Yes, and I really brought that out in the book. So you can do it as a on the cushion meditation practice for a shorter or longer session. You can do all the steps or just one of the steps. There's 8 steps total, or I give the on-the-spot version for each of the steps. And you can just in 10, 20, 30 seconds, like you mentioned, you see somebody suffering on the street, or you hear something in the news, or see something on TV, then you just can instantly, once you have some familiarity with establishing this sense of the awake presence in your heart chakra, then you can just breathe in that suffering, have it transformed into love, and breathe it out. So, and any of the steps you can do like that in an instant. So I think that is very powerful for us to integrate into our daily life.
Yeah, it does. It can feel similar, I think, to loving kindness, right? It can feel as if, oh, there is something that I can do, even when we can feel powerless, right?
Right. And that's an important issue. Like I had a 3-year-old, I tell about her in the book, that came to me once because she felt, she didn't, of course, use those words, but she was feeling a little powerless because she'd see other kids being hurt on the playground, like when kids were mean to them or something, or she'd see an animal dead on the road. And she felt so much sorrow about that. And so I gave her that practice she could do on the spot in the moment. And she really liked it, came back 6 weeks later and said it really helped her because it gave her something where she could feel she could do something and not be powerless.
Right. It is, I think, a beautiful practice in that way, where it just gives you a sense of like, oh, there is something that I'm able to do. And I think one of the fears about this for a lot of people, and you and I were talking about this before we began recording, is I can't take on more suffering, right? Like I'm already suffering enough. And one of the things whenever I was taught what I loved, and this really has stuck with me, is that you're not taking it on. It doesn't become yours. You're a filter for it.
Or a transformational station, I like to think.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, so that's how this particular Tonglen is different, and it's been taught orally for 1,000 years, but was never fully and completely written down before. But it's different in that you do call upon an awakened presence, whoever you're feeling, that you'd like a connection or you have a connection with, and asking for our awakened wisdom love to be fully opened. And then that awakened presence, whether it's the Bodhisattva of compassion, Chenrezig, or as she also called Kuan Yin, that presence dissolves into us. And then, like I said, we feel that divine awakened presence in our heart chakra, inseparable with our own true nature, our own awakened presence. And then that's what does the transformation. So that's one thing. It's not the little beleaguered ego that already feels like it has so much suffering that's really doing the transformation. But there's another piece, and in this particular version of Tonglen, we're taught to first really do the meditation for ourselves. And when we learn it, in a way where we're going to do the practice every day, we recommend that people do the Tonglen and work with oneself first for some months. So that's an option, to just do this love and compassion practice for oneself first for some months. And it's ironic, but like you said, we don't want to feel more suffering. We'd rather feel better. But the hardest thing about this meditation, and I've seen this again and again, is people feel that it's really hard to have love and compassion for themselves. And then if we can really do that, like spend the time and work through our own issues about feeling unworthy or whatever it is, if we can work through those and really develop loving kindness and compassion for ourselves and be with what's really going on with ourselves in that process and allow that to be transformed, then we're far more able to really be there for others as well and engage in this transformational process, for others and ourselves.
And can we talk about these 8 steps? Because I think it's really lovely the way you have broken it out, right? Love on every breath in 8 steps. And clearly there's step 1, and I assume that's where you encourage us to begin, resting in open awareness. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah. So resting in open awareness really is, to actually be able to do that, we gradually move into it. But it's very easy for everybody to just sit down for, whatever amount of time and then let go of thoughts, anything to do with the past, the future, any kind of evaluating the present. And as we see our thoughts come up, just let go again and again and again, and instead become one with our felt experience and with the totality of our experience, simply resting in awareness, open to the totality of our experience, yet relaxed and letting the mind be at ease, let it rest, and keep letting go of thoughts, which is the mind being busy instead of resting, and then just rest in that presence. And so this is the first step, letting go of all conceptuality, opening to what is, and just being present with what is.
And what about step 2, seeking refuge?
It's very powerful in the beginning of our meditation to call upon, again, whoever we're connected with spiritually. In a Buddhist sense, this is taught that we call on the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, anybody we feel close to in the tradition, like our own teachers, or some people, for example, feel very close to the female Buddha Tara. So if for a Christian, it could be Jesus or Mary or God, or in another tradition, something similar. So we call upon this awake or divine presence to be with us, to transmit to us their divine or awakened love and wisdom. And then we feel that they're present with us during our whole meditation, transmitting to us and holding the space for us to do our inner work. So that's the second step. And that's, the Tibetans say this is very empowering for our meditation. And it also, the awakened beings mirror to us who we truly are. They see us with the eyes of wisdom, love. They see who we truly are. And if we develop a relationship, whether it's a formless sense or an informed, embodied divine presence, we can develop a relationship, and this mirroring who we truly are is very, very healing and transformational for us.
Beautiful. And of course, we've got 3, cultivating the awakened mind. So after we get into the awakened sanctuary, then we work to cultivate the awakened mind.
Right, right. So then again, this step really opens up our meditation and opens us more to truth and the reality of what is, and a great open heart. So what this means is we enter into our meditation thinking, I'm going to engage in this meditation not only for my own benefit, but for all beings' benefit. Not all beings have the inclination or circumstances to be able to meditate. And so I am going to do my spiritual practice. I'm going to meditate on behalf of all beings everywhere. And this really also empowers our meditation. And it opens us up to the reality that we're not actually separate from each other.
I love that. As someone who's obsessed with all beings, particularly animals, I love the incorporation of that into this practice.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. And the animals too, like that's all included, as you know, in all beings. It's not just humans, it's all beings everywhere.
Right, which is so beautiful. Now, steps 4 through 6, there's love incorporated into it, from stepping into love, the heart of love on every breath, taking and sending for yourself. And then, of course, 6, the heart of love on every breath, taking and sending for others. Can you tell us a little bit about 4 through 6 and this overarching umbrella of love?
Yes. So as I mentioned before we do the taking and sending, the heart of the Tonglen, we call upon an awakened presence. And in this tradition, it's, as I mentioned, the Bodhisattva of compassion and love, Chenrezig, or his Sanskrit name is Avalokiteshvara, in Chinese Kuan Yin, Japanese Canon. This Bodhisattva of compassion is throughout a lot of the Buddhist world, has been venerated for thousands of years. So, and actually, you may have heard of the Heart Sutra. That was actually spoken by this same Bodhisattva. But anyway, so you call upon this being, or if you're in another tradition or you're not in any spiritual tradition, I give ways you can adapt this for your own sensibilities. So you call on this presence, this awake presence, and pray that in your own way, in your own words, that our innate love and compassion will be fully opened. And then this being dissolves into light, or if it's a formless presence of God, dissolves and into light, comes into us. And then you have a sense that you are now inseparable from this awakened presence. And this is held as a light in the heart chakra traditionally. And the drawing of this is in the book of a Vajra of Light, which is symbolic of our true nature, our pure, primordial, unstained, birthless, deathless, true nature. And for listeners who are unfamiliar with the Vajra, you can also see this as a brilliant drop of light, white light. And then with this sense of this anchoring of awakened love in one's heart chakra, then you go into step 5 and 6. The step 5 where you're imagining your human self in front of you and contemplating, whatever challenges and difficulties and traumas and all these kinds of things that you've had, and really having a sense of feeling compassion and love for oneself, and then beginning the taking and sending.
Beautiful. And then from the taking and sending, we move into 7 and 8, dissolving and dedicating.
Yes. So after then, and again, a meditator can do one step or do the whole series of steps. So if we're doing the whole series after oneself, then we do for others, whether one person or all beings, or, any group of beings or 2 beings or one's family or whoever. And then we see these beings healed, filled with light, awakened, and feel the joy of that. And then once we are complete with how far we want to take that at any point, then we move into, again, just letting go of everything, letting everything dissolve. The whole creative part of the meditation dissolves. And again, we rest in open awareness and just in the presence. And it's very powerful after we've been doing a creative kind of meditation to then let it all go and rest again in this open awareness. And meditators notice that it potentiates our meditation when we do this. Like, it's very interesting, resting in open awareness by going through this process of engendering and opening to love becomes much more potentiated. And so we again rest in that. And then for, 30 seconds or 20 minutes, however long we like, and then we dedicate any and all benefit from our meditation to all beings everywhere, that suffering for all of us may be completely eliminated and we all may be happy and healed, and then come into full and complete awakening. And we imagine that, like, what if we were all living in harmony and we were all living in peace and happiness, and then we were all in the awakening, and, what incredible joy that would be. How much fun we could actually have instead of, how we do it nowadays.
Right. Yeah. And, one of the pieces that you talk about quite a bit in the book is our subtle body.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you could explain to our listeners what you mean by subtle body and how it ties into meditation or mindfulness in general.
Yes. So this is a translation of a Tibetan term and I believe and a Sanskrit term. And it really refers to our energy, what we could say is our energy body. So we have our physical body, we have mind and consciousness, perception, etc. And the interface between these two is called the subtle body or the energy body. Now, of course, it's not something we can see, but we can all feel it. Like, just in any moment, we can just feel how our body feels, how our sense of presence feels. And that is tuning into our energy body. Sometimes, we have these sayings like, I had butterflies in my stomach. That's tuning into our energy body and noticing we have butterflies. It's obviously an expression of a sensation. So this subtle body is transformed when we meditate or do any kind of spiritual practice. I mean, it's constantly, in process, it's constantly present, the subtle body. So whatever we're doing is affecting it. And usually a lot of times we're just living out our habitual patterns. And so the subtle body is, just sort of in the patterning that is our usual way of operating. But when we meditate, we begin to transform the subtle body. It begins to calm down and become, more at peace and wakefulness. Mindfulness is much more much easier to access when the subtle body calms down. And there's a very close relationship to the subtle or energy body and our mind and what our mind is doing in any moment, which is why when we're anxious, we have this feeling, butterflies in my stomach, because whatever is happening in the mind is reflected in the subtle body. So if we're extremely worried, then there's a sort of a tension in our subtle body. And yoga, meditation, all forms of spiritual practice, like, whether it's physical qigong yoga or whatever, or a pure, much more, mind practice, it affects the subtle body. And in spiritual practice and meditation, the channels of the subtle body start to open and unwind, and the energy can flow through them in a much healthier manner.
Beautiful. Yeah, the example of the butterflies in the stomach, I think, is something that everyone can relate to. So thank you.
Yeah.
And so my last question for you is, the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So I'm curious, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
Oh, yes. And that's such a wonderful question. And it so fits with the book because of being able to do these steps any moment, any time. So, as an example for me, excuse me, if I feel agitated or worried, in a moment, I can just let go. And the more we familiarize ourselves with meditation and, possibly with these steps of this love on every breath meditation, then the more familiar we can just let go in an instant into open awareness. Or if we feel really afraid about something or worried, we could, in a moment or two, open to compassion for our human self, do a little bit of the Tonglen, and just really hold ourselves in compassion and love. And I do that, and I do it like, say, if I'm, concerned. We hear so much kind of bad news in the world going on nowadays for people, and I'll just sometimes just pray for the awakened presence to come into me, feel the inseparability, and just feel that sense of being filled with love and radiating love out to all beings. So I use these steps, and they're, very kind of powerful ways in any moment to just transform how we're feeling into something that feels empowered and that really, really brings tranquility and relaxation and a sense of peace, into my mind, and, is incredibly helpful.
Yes, yes. So beautiful. And thank you so much for writing this great book and for sharing with our listeners the various ways in which we can practice it and the kind of steps involved in it.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Savvy Sources. You can find Lama Palden on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I also have a link to her book in the show notes, again, which is kimberlywilson.com/470. So let's stay connected. You can find my books. There's a link in the show notes, eye candy, my Instagram account, my Facebook account at Tranquility du Jour, YouTube, including the new Tea with Kimberly video series that I've been doing really since late spring, and then shop seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion line, TranquiliT. Thanks so much for your support. And yeah, please, please, please share takeaways from these episodes using hashtag TDJ podcast. I love seeing photos, and I love just hearing what is it that's resonating and that you're taking away from the podcast. Wishing you a wonderful week ahead. Namaste.